Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you for the invitation, Adrian. I'm a bit of a fish out of water here. My name is Richard Muscat. Okay, yes, you changed the title for me, Adrian, thank you. And I mainly spend most of my time in a laboratory at the university. But my interest is to do with how alcohol and psychoactive substances work on the brain. In the interim period, though, what I do is I sit on the National Addiction Advisory Board, which advises the Ministry on policy. So the idea here is we're moving the other end, from talking about law enforcement, talking about policy measures. What I'm trying to do is look at the evidence-based for those policy measures, and therefore what types of things we need to take into keep in mind and when we're doing them. So some of the stuff has been repeated, so I'm going to jump over the ones that I have, but Paul Carrier mentioned the national alcohol policy, and the whole idea is to reduce alcohol use, reduce alcohol dependence, and the health and social risks. And with kids under 17 years old, because that's what our law says, that, you know, no one is allowed to drink alcohol if they're 17 or under. Remember, a couple of years ago, it was 16, and a couple of years ago, we had no law at all. You know, 10-year-olds could drink and whatever. And the reason for doing it is that this thing in your head, called your brain, has about, what, 1 billion nerve cells, and possibly about 1 trillion connections. And it doesn't fully mature till you're about 21. So we have the evidence now from doing complicated sort of things like MRIs, etc., to give us the information that making decisions is compromised even in young kids without alcohol. So imagine the effect of pouring alcohol into the brain on your decision making when you're 21. So that is the reason. If I had it my way, I would do it 21. But that's a different story altogether. Okay, harmful use in adults and the drink driving. Okay, Paul mentioned about the different actions, so I'm not going to mention this thing. But what I'm going to mention is the indicators to monitor progress. Charmaine is probably around, somewhere around. The Department of Health and Information collect information about a number of people who have disorders due to alcohol, etc. We in the Ministry of Social Policy have a unit specifically there to collect information on, for example, how many people in the population use alcohol, whether they use it regularly, whether they use it, every month, etc. We have systems through which we collect information from the kids. Probably most of you have heard of the school studies that we do every 4 years since 1995. And yes, we're top, as usual, one of the things we are, top in Europe with alcohol drinking among 15 and 16-year-olds. It's around, what, was 80 to 90%. But at last, in the last survey in 2015, it is starting to come down, which is around 82%, which is absolutely fantastic. So we do have the monitoring systems in place in which to look at whether we're doing things rightly or not. All right, this is taken from the WHO, and I love it, because it's an infographic that says it all to me, except the only problem with it is it's got the brain, the part of the brain is the smallest bit. But from alcohol and health, what you see is that there are 3 million deaths a year. And out of that, again, we men are very good at doing this, we account for 3/4 of that. And women account for 1/4. So it's around, what, 2.3 million deaths, men, and about 700,000 of women. And as you can see, on the left-hand side, 100%, obviously, alcohol use disorders, which includes dependence, alcohol dependence. The use disorder implies there are harms as well. But look at the high figures through alcohol use with suicide, 18%, personal violence, and again, what interests you here is 27% is traffic injuries, and 13% is epilepsy. And then on the other side, that's the rest of the body, cirrhosis, mouth cancers, pancreatitis, breast cancer, hypertensive disease, and only just a couple of days ago in the top journal Nature, a study on 500,000 individuals looking over 10 years on people drinking 2 drinks, 1 or 2 drinks or more, showed that you increase the chances of stroke. That means limiting the amount of blood to your brain, increases it by 38%. So they're about, in the population, 16 out of 100 people are likely to get a stroke in their lifetime. If you now drink alcohol, you double the risk. And that is with 2 drinks or more. So the back level is 2. So just drinking 2 drinks a day, you're increasing your chance of a stroke. The nice thing about this is how does it link then to the next bit? Because if you have problems with drinking alcohol in the population or drinking alcohol at all, how do you put in policy measures which are evidence-based that basically now reduce the use of alcohol while driving, etc.? The 3 main or best buys or things that work is to regulate the alcohol distribution, to restrict or ban advertising, and that is getting a bit more difficult now with social media, and to have control on the price, taxes, etc. Those 3 things seem to work pretty well. And then what you need to do is, the bottom line is education. At the end of the day, you can have all the enforcement you like, but if we don't have a culture in which, as has been developed in Australia, like Brett was saying, over 10, 15 years, in which, as he was saying, with the experience with his dad, I'm sorry about your dad, that he went, drink driving and was caught, and basically could go back to the courts and say, look, my livelihood, and the courts would think, generously, to a culture in which it's just not tolerated at all. We need to get to a point where that if you were with friends out drinking and someone, said, oh, I'm going to drive home, one of us would say to them, no, don't go out and drive. It's the same with smoking. Smoking, I remember in my time, because I'm still a smoker, I'm one of those idiots, is that I used to get onto the plane, and 1 to 10 were the smoking seats, and 10 to 20 or the 30 weren't the others. So I was at number 10 smoking, and poor people behind me were getting covered in smoke. Now we don't tolerate that at all. No chance. Even everyone thought here, in our restaurants, the people were saying, the restaurateurs were saying, we're going to lose business, we're going to lose this or that. Mainly, people don't smoke. At least now, at last, we don't smoke in cars. Because that was the other thing, the kids in the back row, and the dad in front smoking, etc. So that is stopped as well. Seatbelts have worked. So it takes the education and the understanding and everyone agreeing with and moving on. And that, to me, is the best. Enforcement helps, no 2 ways about it. Okay, so the measures, so we have an understanding that what you're doing with your alcohol is basically, I had the best description out. When one of my friends some years ago was in hospital because he was practically comatose when we were young, in London, drinking, etc. Absolutely comatose. Was taken to hospital, with him in the hospital, and the anaesthetist comes along. And I say, is he going to be okay? He's going to be okay. And he says to me, yes, it'll take a bit of time, but it's like putting sand in your Rolex watch. Do you expect your Rolex watch to be working if you did that? Yes, it will take a bit of time. Your watchmaker will take the thing to pieces and put it back together again. It will lose maybe a second over a day, but you're not going to worry, but it would never be the same Rolex watch again. So this is what you're doing. Okay, I've got a few figures, but the only point I want to make here is, if you look at the yellow one, those are the deaths due to alcohol. The yellow thing at the top is the EU, is us, World Health Organization, and the age range is 20 to 40. So the maximum number of deaths all over the world, the other lines, the black one at the bottom, and you can see about how culture makes a big, big difference, is known as the Eastern Mediterranean region, which is the Middle East. So there's a culture now, look at the deaths to alcohol, practically zilch. Our culture, where we tolerate alcohol quite a bit, we're the highest, the red ones is America and Asia in between. And the other thing is, as usual, we men outperform the women, as usual, on the wrong things. Okay, the the point about where are we in the sort of order of things of the world, there are 200 countries, about 200 countries, and you can see the whole region, that's us. There are 34 countries that have a alcohol policy. This is data of 2016. So at last, we'll make that 35 and increase the world 70 to 71. So there are only 71 countries in the whole of the world who have written alcohol policies. Okay, the back levels, as we've now moved us down to 0.05. And in all honesty, I hope, I pray, my aspiration is, with the advisory body, addictions advisory body, over the next 4 or 5 years, we get it to zero. Zero tolerance. That was what I would like to see. So you can see there are about what? Worldwide, 76 countries. And this other bit about sobriety, politely calling them sobriety checkpoints, as Brett has mentioned, the number of countries who do this is pretty low. All right. Here in the world is 124, in Europe it's 48. And the back concentration, the different colors are over different years. As you can see, at last, where the enforcement in the direction is going to high enforcement from 2008, 12 to 16. At last in the right direction. And you say, Malta, we don't have data. Yes. This is exactly taken from the WHO report, which actually Charmaine and Neville Calleja report to the WHO. Those are all our figures. Per alcohol per capita per year, we're at around, 8.1%, and we've been hovering around there for the past couple of years. The problem is that the EU, as a whole, has gone down, and especially, believe it or not, the southern regions. And especially Italy. But we have remained stable for a change, but we should be going down. All right, and the interesting thing is that our consumption is basically, the same. Spirits, wines, and beer. Normally, spirits is at the top, around 45%, then you get beer around 25%, and then the rest around 10% is wine. Okay. Policies, you see, health and consequences and mortality, liver cirrhosis, the number of deaths, 15, traffic accidents and injuries, 5, and the cancers to alcohol drinking is around 43, and then the policies and interventions at last, because this is taken from the WHO report that was launched, I think, in September, October 2018. At last, yes, we do have a national policy, and yes, the level has been removed, turned down, gone down from 2.05, and yes, we do have monitoring systems. Thank you very much for your patience and time. Thank you. Thanks.